In this module, we are going to be talking all about the data for our projects. One of the most standard ways to handle your data within Wix is, of course, to use the built-in Wix CMS. This is essentially like a database that Wix offers along with the platform. You can also, of course, incorporate third-party data using either their APIs or using the external database connector, which I mentioned earlier in our tour. For now, we are going to be focusing mostly on the Wix CMS and talk about third-party APIs a little later. First, let's start with a brief refresher about the Wix CMS. So in order to interact with the CMS from the editor, we can go over here to where we see kind of like a database icon. And when I hover over it, it says CMS. And here we can go straight to your collections and go ahead and create our first collection. Going to go and click Get Started, and we have several options here. So we can either start from scratch. That's what we'll usually do if we are building our platform from scratch on Wix. If we have some previous data or we're converting to Wix from another platform, we might want to import from a CSV. And creating with AI is something that I usually only do when I am making a tutorial, but you might find it useful to kind of kickstart your collection and then make some adjustments based on your needs. So I'm going to just go ahead over here and start from scratch. And then we're prompted to name our collection. So I'm just going to name this example. And here underneath, we have a collection ID. This is the ID that we are going to use inside of our code in order to identify this collection. I'm going to go ahead and click Create. And here you can see that we have our first collection. Initially out of the box, Wix has certain limitations on how many collections and how many items you can have based on your tier. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 50 collections and 10,000 items for a free site when you're just experimenting, but you can take a look at the quotas inside of their documentation. I don't think that you should hit any massive blockers when you're initially developing your website. Here we have a Wix collection. It works pretty much as a table style database. So initially we don't have any items here, but I can go ahead and add in a field. Once we add in a field, we can choose from multiple different data types. And I'm going to go, for example, and click text. And this will be my example field within my example collection. And you can see that as I create the field name, I also have the field ID over here. And again, this is the ID that we are going to use inside of our code to identify this field. It's important to note that these cannot be changed. So once you determine a field ID, if you want to change it, you're going to have to delete that field and create it anew. If you don't see the field ID here for some reason, then just double check and make sure that you have code mode turned on, because this is a feature that's part of the developer platform, because as I said, the field IDs are used for coding. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and click Save, and this will add in an additional field and give us the option here to add more items to our CMS collection. I could just click Add Item, and editing the fields happens here just like you would in an Excel spreadsheet. So you can just go ahead and type this is text, for example, and that will be the value for the field. So essentially we have items in the rows and our fields are in the columns. Usually, if we're building a web app, a lot of our data is not going to be manually entered as I'm doing now, but rather entered by our users. So user-generated data. And these CMS collections can be accessed using a series of Velo APIs called the Wix Data APIs. These can be used for both executing CRUD operations on existing collections, so creating new items, updating, deleting, and it can also be used in order to create new collections themselves. Usually that's a little more rare, a slightly more niche use case when it comes to building web applications, but we will be extensively using Wix data in order to query and manipulate the data from these data collections. The CMS and our collections can also be accessed via the site dashboard. So we'll do that by going over here to CMS. And here we should see the example collection that we already created. The advantage of going into the CMS from the dashboard is one, that you can have your CMS open alongside the editor. So for example, having the CMS in the dashboard open in one tab and having the editor open in another tab while you're writing code or something along those lines. In addition, we have several pieces of functionality that we don't have in the editor. One of them is organizing our collections into folders. So once we have additional collections, we can go ahead here and create a folder. Give it whatever name you want. So let's say my folder. And I'm going to go ahead and click create. And then I can add collections into folders. So for example, go over here, 3 dots, and then move to folder. And select the folder and move the collection into the folder. Okay, this unfortunately doesn't reflect on the editor side, so still we're just going to see a list of all our collections when we access those collections via the editor. But here inside of the CMS, we can organize them. In the dashboard, we can organize them and have a slightly less jumbled view of all of our collections. There isn't any functionality that's changed when you group certain collections together in a folder. It doesn't change the relationship between the data in those collections. It's purely an organizational tool. In addition, here from the dashboard, we also have the option to manage the backups of our collections. Wix backs up collections manually at certain intervals, and you also have the option to do manual backups as well as restore a certain backup that's in the backup records. So definitely take a look at that if you want to plan ahead or need to restore some previous data. We also have the advanced settings, which is quite important because this is what will allow us to access the Wix app collections from within our own CMS. So every Wix business solution that you install comes with its own collections that help manage the data of that business solution. So for example, Wix stores, Wix bookings, and if we want to interact with those collections from within our collections, then we will need to turn on Wix app collections just by toggling that on. In addition, here we have the option to use a sandbox. Sandbox is a feature that used to be built in out of the box inside of the CMS, and now Wix has taken a step back and offering it here as an advanced setting. Essentially, it allows you to create a parallel collection for each live collection that can be populated with test data and can be used in the preview mode of your website. I generally don't use it so much personally, but it's likely that you will either see it on some older Wix websites or that you might find it useful yourself. So this is where you can find and toggle on that feature should you want to use it. In addition to the CMS icon here in the editor and the CMS section of our dashboard, we also have access to our data collections via the code panel. So if we go over here and open the code panel, which we're getting more and more familiar with, then you can see over here we have the databases section, and this gives certain dev access to collections. So for example, here we will see a list of all our collections. As I noted, there's nothing that specifies that this collection is now part of a folder, for example. But we can see here the name of the collection, but also the ID of the collection in parentheses, and we can easily copy it should we want to use it in our code. We can also open up the hierarchy of the collection and see all of the fields as well as their field IDs, which can be used in the code. So specific information that we would need as developers when we're interacting with the Wix data with the Wix CMS. From here, we also have the option to open certain collections and create new collections as well. In the code panel view of our databases, we also have, in addition to our Wix CMS collections, we have any external databases that are connected, if any, and we also have access to the Wix app collections. These, as I mentioned when we were exploring the dashboard, are collections that are associated and store data of specific Wix business solutions. So for example, you can see here Wix members. And if we install additional apps like Wix stores and bookings, so you'll see them listed here under members. Wix app collections are usually set to read only, so you can go ahead and open the collection and view what's inside, but you cannot edit the data like you could from the CMS collection UI, but rather you would have to interact with those collections using the specific APIs for that business solution. From this panel, we can also add in new collections. So we can create collections here as well, just by clicking this plus sign right over here. We also have the option to interact with existing collections. So if we click the three dots over here by any collection, we have the option to open it up in that CMS collection view that we saw initially. We can edit different settings regarding that collection. Importantly, we can edit the permissions and privacy, which is what we're going to talk about extensively in the next lesson. We can add in dynamic pages. We can add in data hooks, which we're also going to talk about in a later lesson of this module. And of course, we can delete the collection. Note that if you delete a collection and create a new collection with the same exact name, it will restore the data from the previous collection. There might be a certain time cutoff, like 7 days, but if you delete a collection and right after that go ahead and create a new collection with the same name, you'll notice that the fields and the data are actually the same as the one that you just deleted. So if you really want to get rid of a collection, you're going to have to create a new one which has a slightly different name.